Welcome back, listeners, to the very first episode of Chapter 3. In this episode, Melissa, Brandi, and I sit down and discuss the dynamic of leadership at Come As You Are, specifically surrounding the several pastors that have come and gone up to this point in our timeline. So we take a deep dive into all of the pastors, some of which we've mentioned up to this point in the podcast. Others will be brand new to you, but from the time that Tom founds the church in 1998 all the way up until we bring on Pastor Younggun as a pastor in 2015.
Faith can feel like hearts and butterflies until someone lights a match and burns it all to the ground. Welcome to the Burning Butterflies podcast.
The sad thing is that there's abuse of every kind within the church, but the spiritual abuse is the stuff that just
What's a place there shouldn't be abuse? Like, there just shouldn't be abuse in a place that claims Jesus.
Well, it ruins your soul. If you're new here, we suggest listening to our prologue episode first. This is the story of two women's journey through spiritual abuse and escaping from toxic church culture while finding hope in Christ.
Sometimes it's just the facts, and if you get offended by it, that's a you issue. And if we can't be mature enough to have these conversations, even if some of the topics are difficult, then shame on us.
Up until this point, we have discussed pastors that have kind of come and gone and licensing some pastors at Come As You Are, all that were hand chosen by Pastor Tom. And so before we get into our Chapter 3 timeline, we really want to go back and look at these people and talk about them, because Pastor Younggun is going to come into the picture, and really he flips everything on its head, and he changes the trajectory of Come As You Are. And this is a pivotal moment for the church and for people serving in the church, is when Pastor Younggun comes full time. So we're going to kind of talk about what led up to that. So ladies, you guys were here for some of it, but for some of it, it was before your time. So I am going to start way back in the day of 1998 when the church was founded, and it was just Tom. And we've discussed, Tom went and pretty much bought a kit, how to start a church in 10 easy steps, the Saddleback way, and all the purposes and all the things, and he starts his church. He has his daughter and his son-in-law, and the dream, the goal, was that they were going to enter the ministry alongside of Tom and Charlotte. And eventually one day, the son-in-law would be the one to take over the throne of Come As You Are. The problem that comes with that, though, is the son-in-law and the daughter didn't want that. They leave on a missions trip. They're gone for a few years. And even while they're gone, the whole talk is that they are going to come back and they will take over. And he will become an associate pastor, and eventually he will become the senior pastor when Tom is ready to retire. And they don't come back to Come As You Are. They fall in love with ministry, and their life leads them a totally separate direction. And there's some family dynamic there that I think, Melissa, you could probably speak to a little bit more.
Yeah, it's a weird family dynamic, but I mean, I think like that happens in like high control families, where you have very dominating matriarchal and patriarchal roles, and when your children like agree or don't agree with the way you do things. And it's just such an interesting, you have to remember that Pastor Tom was not a pastor from like the get-go. So like he had a whole long life ahead of him, and he was like 35 when he decided to give his life back to Jesus, and then tried to be involved in church and do the right thing, like all of us, which is kind of crazy. But, didn't like the way the Baptist church did things and broke off into his own church dynamic. But it is interesting, like, as far as like family conversations go, to see how the children of this high control family respond to the parents. Like the family dynamic is very typical for what you see in families where parents are narcissists or have any type of narcissistic disorder. And, we see that a lot with Froggy, where he puts on the show to be the good son, but in his real life, it's night and day difference, and is doing things totally 100% opposite of what his parents would have for him to do. So breaking the rules. And then you've got like the good son, but it's the same thing. There's this secret hidden life. Well, with the daughter, like she has the real life that's really good and is doing all the right things and is really pursuing, her calling from God. And so the dynamic is different in the house. So where the boys like kiss butt in the house and are on the surface what they're supposed to be, in their real lives, there's a lot of cracks in those walls. But the sister is like genuine and really doing it, but she doesn't spend as much time in the family dynamic. And when she does, there's a lot of debate and disagreement and not arguing, and it's not hateful. Like there's a lot of love there in the family, but it's definitely like there are topics that, I used to work in bars and stuff, and you'd be like, don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion. It's like they have rules like that in the house. Like these are topics that you avoid because these two people who are very passionate about what they believe are going to end up like in an argument over it. So we just don't talk about it. We just agree to disagree. So there's a lot of that goes on. But this is the time that I started coming to the church, was when they were coming back from like these mission trips. And I came in thinking that like, even I knew they were supposed to come back and take over, right? Or be something. So, and then it was very,
I did too.
Yeah. And it was very,
I didn't even know who they were. I didn't know where they were.
Yeah.
I didn't even know they existed. And then all of a sudden I knew that they were the chosen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, they're on their missions trip. And at some point it becomes apparent that they are not going to come back to Come As You Are. They are not going to follow the path that Tom has laid out for them. They feel like God is leading them down a completely different path. And I believe rightfully so. I think that path that they have followed, they've been very successful, and like you have seen God work in their lives in that going down that separate path. And this is the point where they are still gone. We are all still being told they will come back, even though I think, again, hindsight 2020, I think this is the point where Tom starts to realize, I don't think they are going to come back.
If I remember correctly, it was almost like this build up to the Super Bowl and then watching the game and you don't know which team is going to win. And I remember there being a lot of, I don't even know if there ever was indecision on, the daughter's part. They might have been like, no, these are the choices that we made. They could have been very secure and sure in that. I have no idea. I just remember there being like, will they choose us or will they go somewhere? Like there was a lot of indecision and a lot of hanging on and praying for them to want to come back, to Come As You Are. And then in the end, they were like they dropped the bomb. Like, we're going to an entirely different state.
Yeah. So why they are still gone, we have this span of like 2004 to 2006 where we are bringing in these random pastors. And this is something that I think Tom thought this is the way you're supposed to do it. This is the way a lot of churches do it, is you go out and just like, you know, you have websites like Indeed and stuff like that to be able to find people to fill job positions at your business. There's things like that for pastors. And so Tom goes out and he finds this. So we're going to call this like the era of randos, because we just get these random people that come in. There was an older man who came in as a quote unquote associate pastor. He was hired on staff. He was much older. Like, I just remember, and like, I don't even know how old he was, but like compared to Tom, he seemed like an old man. And he had pastoring experience and all of this stuff. And so he came in, he would like, when he first came in, he'd like taught a sermon, but he definitely wasn't like a preaching. It's not like him and Tom traded off kind of thing. This is kind of the era where I was in college. And so this is kind of, you know, Justin and I weren't full time at the church. And so, this guy had a wife, and, you know, they would kind of, they were involved in things. Like, she was involved in women's ministry. They jumped in with both feet fairly quickly because he got hired here. And I can only assume that the church was paying him, because, I mean, why would you move to this middle of nowhere town in northern, like, they weren't from here locally. They moved here for this job. And like, they were more conservative, and even more so than like Tom, but very much like almost to the point of fundamental. So they came, and very shortly after they came, they hadn't been at the church for very long, we had women's retreat. And his wife comes to women's retreat, and she loses her mind and yells at all of us for eating food with preservatives in it. And do we know what we're doing to our bodies? And we are God's temple, because we were eating like chips and candy. And she lost it. And I mean, like, not just like, oh my gosh, do you not know? Like, I mean, she's yelling at us that we are poisoning the temple.
Okay. So,
and
like, hold on. Like, okay, was this guy like a pastor? Like, do you
yes,
know, like, he went to seminary, he was a pastor, he was looking for a job. What?
Tom found him on like a website. Okay. And this is
like pastor.com.
Yes,
like,
I'm going to assume though, like, this is like,
yeah,
not so much
he had to have had
$40 and become a pastor. Like, this is like, these are probably legitimate pastoring people from a far more fundamental based thought.
Where'd they come from?
They came from somewhere back east. I want to say like North Carolina or something like that.
So
totally, yeah, exactly. But well, hold on.
No drinking, no dancing, because they're really Baptist,
right? Yeah. So what do you think? Like, I just want you to put yourself in Tom's shoes for just a moment, right? Like, for what you know about him, you're sitting at a computer, you need to hire a pastor, you're on hireapastor.com, so you're looking at resumes. Like, I've been a hiring manager, right? So there's things that you look for, there's things that you're doing. What qualifications, since I don't know this guy, I can't judge that, but Amanda, you like actually met this guy. What qualifications do you think were in this guy's resume that Tom was like, this is the guy this is the guy. Like, he chose to hire him.
Yeah, I think honestly the biggest thing was like, this guy was seeking to be an associate pastor. He didn't want to be a head pastor. He didn't want all of the responsibility that came with being the head senior pastor. He wanted to support the senior pastor. And so I think to just come out and say something like that, like, that fed Tom's ego of like, oh, he doesn't want to come in and take over. He's going to listen to me.
Yeah.
He's going to come in and be like, well, I'm entering your house. I'm going to do things your way. And
then I think it's very interesting that he chose somebody whose belief system was so much more to one side, extreme, more extreme than what Tom's is, or what Tom's looks like on the outside.
But when it comes down to it, is it really shocking that Tom didn't fully vet the dude? Like, I mean, really?
No, that's
like,
what
is it shocking?
Right. No, that's what I mean. Like, if you're talking about, you've got probably a 3-page resume, maybe, right? With all of these words on it.
Yeah.
And he bullet pointed 6 things that he was like, or even 3 things. He was like, yeah, that's the guy. So I just think it's interesting, like looking back at like, this is his first process of hiring, but knowing, like you said, the hindsight 2020 to look at the, like, spoiler, we know the progression. I know our listener doesn't. So there's just like key points to point out to be like, keep these things in mind. Like, what would possess somebody to pick this person before you tell us what happened to this person in their story?
Well, and knowing the Tom and the son-in-law dynamic, I think there was probably a little bit of like, see, I can be a good boss. I can be a good senior pastor to an associate pastor. And I can, and I think there was a little bit of like Tom trying to prove himself to his son-in-law in an effort of like, yeah, you can come and work underneath me and it'll be okay.
Well, and let's be real, at this time, there's not a lot of money. So I think why he was hired was he was probably drawing a retirement. So the church did not have to pay him a whole lot because there's not a big budget. So I think Tom probably hired him because he is retired but wants to continue in ministry. And you do age out of the church. Like, you really do. And I don't think he would have vetted him fully, because if he was looking at all of these qualified people, 1, you can't be more qualified than him. 2, there's no budget. And he, like Melissa said, he's probably looking at the first 3 bullet points and that's it. And when the fundamental part of it, at this point in time, we're very Rick Warren, almost liberal for Christians, community driven. And as the progression goes further on, we end up where this guy is. So it's kind of funny.
Yeah. Okay, so what happened to this guy? Now that we laid that, like, I just needed some more clarification in the groundwork, but what happens to this guy?
So it's kind of wild because so the wife comes and she flips her crap, right? Like, she loses it. She yells at all of us and we're all like, dude, what is up with this lady? And like, there were some people like me, like, we kind of knew who she was because we knew she was like the new pastor's wife. And like, I remember talking to Charlotte and being like, that was really weird. And Charlotte's like, well, they come from back east and they just have a much more, a much more
hardcore,
in her kind, like Charlotte way. Yeah. Like, they just have different viewpoints, but isn't it beautiful that God can take everyone and just bring us all together into one big happy family? And then like a month later, they're gone.
Can I just make one, I want to just say something really quick. You have mentioned this lady before in other comments, whether on this podcast or not. Like, as soon as you said some lady came and yelled at us about what we were eating, I'm like, oh, I've heard about this lady before. I did not realize that this lady happened in the early 2000s when I wasn't at the church, because I will be honest with you, I thought you were talking about somebody else who was at the church right before I left. Like, that's how weird full circle cycle some of this stuff is like, I had pinpointed somebody else that you've been talking about this whole time.
But honestly, that's why we need to do this episode, because as we continue forward in our story, you're going to see how full circle this all comes and how freaking crazy this gets. And I think this period of time is one of the reasons why when people are hired on staff down the road, Tom pretends like we've never hired anyone on staff before. We've never paid anyone to do ministry. Oh, but we forgot that we did pay Destiny's Child, even though we told the children's ministry person we've never paid anyone for ministry before. Then we tell Brandi, when Brandi does children's ministry, we've never paid anyone to do ministry before. But, so like Tom lives in his own little world where it's easy for him to forget these things. And so he assumes that everyone's just going to listen to what he says and no one else is going to keep receipts.
Right.
And so I think this is one of the reasons why Tom gets mad when he's looking at hiring people, and he's mad at how much people are asking for. Because Brandi, like you said, there's not a lot of money in the budget, but also we're talking 2004. Yeah. What you're being paid in 2004 is completely different than what you're being paid in like 2020. And so Tom is mad because what people are asking for as a beginning baseline pay is what he has made with pay increases over time. And so he is mad. I'm not going to hire someone and pay them the same amount that I'm making, but I'm also not going to make more because I'm a man of God and I'm doing things right. And how come you can't live off of this much money a year? What's wrong with you?
Yeah. Well,
and it's right. you younger generations and your need for money.
It's called inflation.
Yeah,
sir. It's called inflation. I mean, I don't know. My first job was like $4.35 an hour, which was 10 cents more than minimum wage. So,
No, but like
that's a gallon of
when
gas.
When Justin and I first got married,
it's less than a gallon of gas.
He had a job and he was making $1,000 a month, and we thought we were the richest people in the world. Yeah. Like we were living large.
Yeah, but like gas was $6 a gallon in some places when you were making that.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what when Amanda and I get paid, we're paid what Charlotte was getting paid in 1976.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it, and of course we're super grateful and #blessed, and it's the best thing to happen to us. But he also doesn't take into consideration, because he does not keep up with things and how expensive the houses become in this area and everything else.
Well, and it's not just him. Yeah. Like, did you ever see on TikTok or floating around on Facebook Reels the Dave Ramsey one where he was like interviewing some woman about her budget, and she told him how much they pay, was a husband and wife, how much they pay for childcare, and he was like, that's ridiculous. And it's like he's trying to tell him how to live on like 1950s. It should only cost you this much for childcare. Yeah. And she's like, do you even pay for do you know how much childcare is? It's like,
sorry, Grandpa, that's what the world costs today.
Well, anyway, so these people left. No. Was there any explanation given as to why they left?
Just that it didn't work out. But it's really funny because at the same time we hire on this older guy to be an associate pastor, we hire this young kid from California, like fresh out of seminary. He wants to be a youth pastor. He's got like the California spiky blonde, like early 2000s, like looks like a Backstreet Boy.
The Calvary Chapel movement. Those are the
so
that's where I went in California with the beach people. It was good.
Yes. No, he surfed, like all of this stuff, right? Yeah. So he comes and he gets hired on here. So he moves. He has lived in California his whole life. He went to seminary in California, moves to Colorado because he gets this job. He got hired online to come out. He comes out, interviews with Tom. It's a whole thing, right? We hire him on. The amount of girls who start attending youth group, freaking through the roof, man, because they all think he's hot. So, oh yeah, come to my youth group. Our new youth leader is hot. And so he comes, this kid hangs for about a month and he dips and he stands on stage and says, I did not take into account how hard it would be for me to live this far away from the ocean. I cannot live this far away from the ocean. Like, we were concerned, like, we made jokes like, oh, wait till he lasts his first winter. Like, kid didn't even make it to fall. Like, he didn't even get to experience snow because he was gone that fast. And so this is all at the same time. So we lose the older guy and the younger guy fairly quickly. There is a guy, I don't remember him being a part of Come As You Are, but like he very well could have been. So honestly, I don't remember how he is hired on, if he was hired on from the church body or if he was like one of those people we found on the internet. He hung around for a few years. He was a youth leader, and he was not a quote unquote pastor. He was hired on as the youth leader. This is the era where we bought a house across the street from the high school, and that became the youth house. And he grew the youth group. Our youth group was huge at the time, and they were having big Sunday numbers. They were having big Wednesday night youth night numbers. But this is the point in time where like drug deals were being made in the parking lot, like of the youth house. So yeah, come to youth. Yeah, we have to go sit inside, but you get free snacks. And at the end, I'll sell you some weed out of the trunk of my car.
That's a real trunk or treat.
Yeah, exactly. There were kids doing premarital things in the bedrooms upstairs during youth.
Because who thought that was a good idea? Like honestly, like.
Yeah. So once all that stuff kind of started coming out, this guy left, and he left on good terms. Like he's still like, even when I got hired on at the church, his family still sent like Christmas cards to the church every year. And so like he left on good terms, but it didn't work out. And so this is where, once we get into like late 2005, early 2006, we are only talking about God will bring us leaders from within our church. We tried to hire on, and all these people just want money, and all these people are just chasing, all of these things. And, we want someone who God is going to bring up from our own family, who's going to love our family more than someone who's already invested. So if you want to be a leader in this church, you need to be serving selflessly. God is going to use you. This is where all of that stuff started.
And that's so crazy because, like, if you think about it, you just mentioned like what, three different people that came in, and for whatever reason it didn't work out. And that was the big, like, I tried that, it didn't work. And so having outsiders come in for whatever reason, and I do, hindsight 2020, believe that not all of the reasons why somebody says they leave is the reason they really leave. In my experience, most people put a sugar coating on it and never tell you the truth as to why they're leaving.
Oh, yeah.
Until later you start a podcast and then they're like, hey, guess why I really left?
Yeah, they reach out to you and you're like, oh, really?
But I don't know for you, Brandi, was that the story? Because when I started going to the church in 2011, that was definitely it was, Pastor Tom, and we couldn't have another pastor because it had to be somebody from the inside who got it, understood.
Yes.
Like, now that I say it like that, those words coming out of my mouth are ick. Like, it has to be somebody already
you had
groomed.
to serve the body first. If you were going to be a leader or you wanted to be a pastor, and also the mythology of how a pastor became a pastor was that he served the body so much, and that's why we lifted him up. And if you're going to be in any kind of leadership role, you have to serve, and you have to put others before yourself and all these things.
Yep.
But that's only true for certain people.
Yeah. So we start saying these things. So Tom starts preaching in a lot of sermons about how God is going to raise up leaders from within our body, and God will show us who our leaders are. So people will start talking about two men. Pastor All Reliable and this other guy. He served in children's ministry. He's helped out with youth off and on. He taught a lot of master life classes. He was very involved in all ministries. Like he still to this day, I drive by Come As You Are. He is out there mowing the grass. Like he is just an all-around servant. He has a servant's heart. He is a very nice, approachable guy. One of the kindest men that you'll ever talk to. So they start talking about these two men. Pastor All Reliable, we end up licensing him, and I've talked about that, how we voted and all of that kind of stuff, right? This other guy is approached to be a pastor as well. And for years, the lore of Come As You Are was that his wife did not want him to be a pastor. His wife hated the idea of being a pastor's wife. She couldn't live up to the things that would be required of a pastor's wife. And so she is keeping him from living out the life that God has planned for him. And God has, placed all these things in his life to make him a leader and make him a pastor. And his wife has ruined it for him because she is keeping him from living this life. And this continues. Seriously, this starts in 2006. This continues clear up in when we create the elder team in 2020. Same stuff being talked about. And
crazy that's
there
like
is
the narrative, and it just like when you just look at like longevity of narratives,
yeah,
like that's just crazy.
That's 15 years. And so like this woman, do we really blame her that this guy's wife stops coming to church?
Yeah, not when you're like the reason that your husband's life is ruined.
From stage, Tom's not saying her name, but he is definitely pulpit shaming this woman. Well, there's women who think that they can just control what God wants to do with their husbands and the calling that God has on their husbands' lives. And I know men who should be pastors right now, but their wives refuse.
Yeah, it was the same pulpit shaming he did in 2020. I mean, like...
Yeah, do we really do? And so, like, this woman, by the time I'm super active in the church and attending, we've moved down here, I'm attending full time, I'm in ministry, this woman is nowhere to be seen. Do we really blame her?
Yeah, no, not at all.
Because she's treated like crap for 15 years. So,
well, and she does a lot for the church as well. And yeah. When at agency D3, she's one of the only people that aren't involved with me that I remember at that BBS, because she was so into it with her group, came dressed up, like she was amazing. And then when I start hearing this narrative, I'm like, how does that add up?
Yeah. And she's the church's accountant and CPA for years. Like
CPA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She does all of that. And we still treat her like crap. And so this all is in 2006. 2008 is the year where Pastor Young Gun comes, and he has just entered seminary, and he wants to do an internship. So Pastor Young Gun grew up coming to our youth group. His family attended off and on the church, but it is not like, his mom was leading women's ministry. Like, it's nothing like that, right? He attended youth group and got really involved in youth. He was very, very close with Tom and Charlotte's daughter and son-in-law, because they were they were his youth leaders. And they really helped set the groundwork for him to want to enter ministry full time. So he goes to seminary, he comes and he does an internship. So Tom gives him the youth group for the summer. All of that happens in 2008. But really, from the time we licensed Pastor All Reliable, aside from Pastor Young Gun coming from an internship, clear up until 2011, we do not talk about another pastor. All we are talking about is God will raise up leaders. And it is all leaders. There is zero, like our next pastor will, like there was before. There's no talk like that anymore. Zero talk. It is strictly God will raise up leaders from within our body.
Which I think is really interesting because like 2011 is when I started going to the church, and like I say it was like a one-man show. Like it definitely was run where like it was Pastor Tom and nobody else. But it took a while to realize that there was another pastor. You know, like I feel like Pastor Old Reliable's name was mentioned in the bulletin. Like it was like, if you have questions about this, call Pastor Old Reliable. But it wasn't like,
well, and he was given all the ministries that like Tom didn't want to do. Like he did the hospital visitation ministry and like all of those things that like made Tom uncomfortable because he had to deal with people with feelings.
Yeah. And I know that Old Reliable, you know, he had a job outside of being a pastor, but like I'm just like, my first impression of that whole situation is it was a few years before I even realized that there was another pastor at the church.
He, you know, he's not preaching sermons on a Sunday morning. Him and Tom aren't, you know, trading off. He is not, you know, we're not saying like, oh, Pastor Old Reliable, you know, or anything like that. Like you said, it's just, it's mentioned in the bulletin, and that's about it. Like if you know, you know, but if you're new to the church, it's not like, I think of like the church I attend now, our two pastors trade off who is preaching. Our senior pastor does a majority of the preaching, but our associate pastor will get up and preach a sermon a few times, you know, every series that they do. And when they get up, they introduce themselves. Hi, I'm so-and-so, the senior pastor of this church. Or I'm so-and-so, I'm the associate pastor of this church. They introduce themselves like that. And they do when they do the announcements or, you know, things like that. But
well, and I even like attended your church a couple times, and both times that I went there, I met both of them. Like they beeline to be to introduce themselves, like, and not like desperately beeline, but I mean like they definitely were like, "Hi, I'm the pastor here," and then "Hi, I'm the pastor here." Or I think the first time I walked in, the senior pastor was like, "Hey, how are you?" He was on the greeting team. Like, and then he was like, "Oh, I'm the pastor." And then he was like, "Oh, and that guy over there, he's a pastor. And so if you need anything, just let us know. Oh, you've got kids. Here's the youth guy." You know, like it was like the introductions all around.
Yeah.
Then, like the church that I go to, they have like a million pastors. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Everybody's a pastor.
And so there was really none of that.
When I come, I hear more about Old Reliable, but also it's because I'm serving and he is there on Thursday nights, and Thursday nights is being billed as the spiritually mature service, and you want to be there, especially if you're serving. And Old Reliable does communion on Thursday nights, and that is built up into like, this is very important that he does this. So when I come on, he has a different role, but it's very important, and we talk him up.
Yeah, because I think those are the couple years before I realized, because something happened right before you got there, and we needed to have another pastor.
So funny you bring that up. So in 2011, I've talked about how I've stepped away from youth group, right? This young couple was supposed to take on youth group. We have a very prominent couple in the community and in our church, husband and wife couple. And in past episodes, I have talked about how this woman came in and like we had to do mission and vision statements for every ministry and all of that kind of stuff. I assisted in that with the youth group because I was on my way out, but I was handing everything over to this young couple who had been serving in youth for years with me. They knew the kids, they knew the routine, they knew the stuff, right? I was handing youth group off to them. I had no doubt that these two, while they were young, they were very capable and they could have just freaking rocked it, right? They could have done a hell of a job with youth group if they would have been allowed to just go with some guidance. But instead, because they didn't fit the look, the guy was a little... Tom would only see the guy come in. He would only come into youth when the guy was running around crazy at the beginning of youth group playing dodgeball. And so he would never see the serious side. He would never see this guy sitting down with kids who were struggling with something and really helping them through the process. Tom never saw the wife talk. And the wife was very quiet and very... she was one of those, like, she would sit in the room and she would listen, but when she would talk, man, the stuff that woman would say was just, it would blow you away. And so she didn't talk a lot, but when she did talk, what she said carried so much weight. And so Tom never saw those sides of them because he would show up, she would be sitting in the youth room, and the husband's out running around in the gym. And Tom's like, well, how am I supposed to give these to the youth group? When Tom shows up for 2 minutes and then leaves because he doesn't like it, youth group is annoying to him. And he never sits in on an actual lesson. Tom never knew anything of what the actual teaching that was going on for the youth kids ever was. And he never cared to know. He didn't even want to know like what curriculum we were using, nothing. He did not care. And so I'm ready to hand the youth group over to this young couple. And this woman comes in. She does not want the young couple to be leaders. Tom doesn't want the young couple to be leaders. There is a guy who had been helping with youth group. And I was not a fan of this guy because he would say stuff. And like, even like Melissa, your boys would pick up on it. And some other boys in youth group would pick up on it of like, I would say something and he would like mansplain what I said. And he would say in front of the kids how even though I was the one in charge of youth, I was the leader of youth, that it is unbiblical for a woman to be a leader. And he would like, I would say something and then he would just say something to kind of like undermine me. And it's one of those, like, I would be like, well, when the Bible is talking about this, he'd be like, well, actually, that's not exactly what the Bible says. Well, no, sir, I'm paraphrasing. Well, we need to be true to scripture. And then he would, spout off, da-da-da-da-da. And he was kind of condescending and a little bit of a prick. And so...
a little? Come on, a lot.
So when... this woman came in and she didn't want to, she was like, I don't like the fact that this young couple is going to take over youth. Tom didn't like it. It was decided that this guy, the condescending guy, is going to take over youth group and he's going to become the youth leader. And so we're going to call him the wannabe leader, because he wanted so badly to be a pastor, but it was very clear that he was not a pastor. He annoyed Tom, so Tom kind of let him do his thing as long as he just stayed out of his office. So this guy goes in. All of us, up until this point, we have all functioned with like not having to have a quote unquote youth desk in the office. Everyone who has done youth has done it out of their home. Like, yeah, you go in the office, you do, you make copies or whatever that you need to do, but like you didn't need a desk. You didn't need to go into the office to go to work. This guy did. So he goes in, he makes himself a desk, all of this stuff. He starts telling people, new families come to the church, he starts telling them, I'm the youth pastor. He starts introducing himself as a pastor. Tom doesn't know any of this until the guy starts getting mail at the church addressed to Pastor Wannabe. And it's questioned, why does this say pastor? And he's like, oh, well, I guess people just must think I'm a pastor. And he starts using that like because Tom tells the lore of, Pastor Old Reliable didn't come to me and be like, I want to be a pastor. People came to me and were like, I see Old Reliable as a pastor. And so this guy starts using that against Tom, I think in hopes of like, he's going to make me a pastor. Because this guy's not stupid. He knows like there really isn't anything that it's not like he's going to send me to seminary. It's not like he's like, the church will pay the $40 for me to get a license online.
Yeah, because you ought to know that that's also like the narrative. The narrative is that Pastor Tom did not go, like this is told from stage. Like,
yep.
When God puts a call on your life, God will make it happen. There's no school you need to go to. There's no certification that you need if it's God's will. So this is the message from stage, is that Pastor Tom became a pastor by saying, hey, I'm a pastor. God called me to be a pastor. Magic wand, ding, you're a pastor. And that's, I think what this guy was just making that happen. Like, but this is the narrative that he was told. Like, if you want to be a pastor, if that's your calling on your life, all you have to do is show up and God will equip you to be a pastor. I also want to point out that this is the time that my daughter stopped going to the youth group at Come As You Are and started going to another church for youth group because of how degrading to women that this guy was.
Yeah.
But he took his training of how to be a Christian man serious, how to be a misogynistic patriarchal male.
Yep. So around the same time that this guy declares himself a youth pastor, because apparently that's what Tom did. I declare myself a pastor. Ding! I'm going to start my own church. So this guy declares himself the youth pastor. That prominent couple that the wife is going around and working with all the ministries, we license the husband. And this is where I question Tom, because I'm like, I knew nothing about this. Like when we licensed Pastor Old Reliable and he officially became a pastor, we voted. There was a whole thing leading up to it. And Tom was like, no, the vote never happened. It never, like, we never did that. And I'm like, no, like we did. I remember doing that. And
which I mentioned earlier, it occurred to me when we were preparing for this episode that I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that Old Reliable became a pastor, but was like so in the background for so many years that it's not until he like takes an active role. And I think that's the mile marker for Pastor Tom. So he's like, you're like, we had a whole licensing ceremony, but in his mind, even though he made Pastor Old Reliable pastor 5 years before, he wasn't a pastor in Tom's mind until he was like, well, now I need him to be a pastor. So he's a pastor. So that like oddly kind of made sense, where I was like, it's still messed up, but it made sense then if I'm like, that might actually be what happened. I don't know.
Yeah. So we're in 2012. We license this guy. We do it like on an obscure like Tuesday night or something like that. Like it's a weird time that we do it. I'm out of town when it happens, and Tom is mad at me because I can't take pictures of it. And it is, even though I had no idea it was happening until like the Sunday before it's going to happen. It's announced. It's not even like put in the bulletin, like leading up to it, like, hey, in 3 weeks, we're going to do this. Or, like there's no hype around it. Getting a new pastor at a church should be a very important thing, especially if you are spouting off how God is raising it up from within your own body. God put a calling on this man's life from within the fold. And from our family, God is raising up a leader. You would think that would be a much bigger deal, but no, it's just like, yeah, we're going to do this. So come back in a couple days and we're going to do this. And I'm like, hey, I'm out of town. And Tom's like, well, then you have to figure out who's going to take pictures of this.
Which is so crazy because like, it's like, because it happened that way. And then like, it was such a short-lived thing. Like,
yeah, within 2 years, they left the church.
Yeah, we went from a prominent prominent people in our community, prominent people at the church, to being sold this idea that this man was called to be a pastor, to bam, he's a pastor, to like they try to do pastor things, and then it fizzles out and they leave the church entirely within 2 years. And it's like, it's so bizarre. Like, what? I was there for this, and I'm like, to me, it seemed like at the time, because I don't know, I mean, I know these people, I know of these people, I've worked with these people, and I can't say that I disagree that he should have been a pastor, because I mean, I think he should have been a pastor, you know, like, I mean, he has that personality.
But
now,
he also had a day job that he was very successful in. And worked several hours a week. So like, it's not like, oh, I have a part-time job and like, I'd really like to be a pastor, but like, I'm just kind of doing this to help pay the bills. No, this man and his wife had very well-paying, highly successful
jobs. Extreme career business. But that's what I'm talking about, is like, to me, being like on the outside-ish, you know, looking in, the way that it was presented, it was like, you wouldn't think that the end result of them leaving and just continuing on with their careers, like, they're really good Christians. And this guy has a great personality, has a great way of communicating with people. He's very kind. He's very gentle with people, like, really like them. But like, just to look at the whole like 2 year from start to finish, you're like, did this guy even want to be, like, did this guy want to be a pastor? Was he somehow manipulated into being a pastor? Because there's nothing about the rest of the story that makes me think that he was, like, you have the other guy who's like, I was called to be a pastor and I'm going to do everything I can to manipulate the situation to be a pastor. And you have this guy who's like just really good at being a Christian and being a part of the church. It also gives a lot of money to the church. And you're like, now we have to make him a pastor. So it's interesting to me. Just saying.
Oh, so he's a man who's a good Christian who gives a lot of money.
Yeah.
We should make him a leader.
That's what I'm saying. I'm like, and I'm not saying anything bad about them.
But there's women who are serving, who are good Christians, who give a lot of money, and they are told later on down the road, nope, we're not even going to consider you for even eldership, because no women. Yeah. Nope, absolutely not. But I think what is really important to look at here is that dynamic between this guy and Pastor O'Reliable and Tom, because like you said, Melissa, it's Pastor O'Reliable is in your face. Unless you were there when we made him a pastor, if you're new coming in, you're kind of like, I don't even know who this guy is. Like, people were kind of frustrated that like they never saw his wife. Well, his wife worked full time all week long. Like she held down a 40-hour-a-week job. And so it just, there was almost like a double standard there. But it was fine that this prominent pastor held down a job, and it was fine that he didn't show up to all the church stuff because his job was really important. But Old Reliable's wife, people were upset that she didn't show up to some stuff because she held down a 40-hour-a-week job also. And so there is that double standard there. But I think what is also really important to look at during this time is we start looking at spiritual gifting and your personality types and all of this. This is the time where we're going through and we're looking at, like, in SALT training, we take like the DISC assessments, and we're looking at, you know, how your personality types work together and all of that kind of stuff. And so it is very much presented. And I think this is that pivotal point where now we need Pastor O'Reliable. And I think it happens for two reasons. One, because as we're going through those things and we're talking about spiritual gifting and we're really looking at those sections of scripture, it becomes apparent that Tom is not living up to all of the things that it says a pastor should be. He's not doing all the things because he's pawned some of those off on Pastor Reliable. Then you have this new pastor that we just licensed. He doesn't show up a lot, but his prominent job is he's a doctor in like living free in the wild. His day job is a doctor. So now it is presented that together as a pastor team, they meet all the criteria because Pastor Tom is the teacher. He is the authority. He is the this and this and this. Pastor Reliable is the compassionate one. And he will go and visit you in the hospital and he will pray. He's the head of the prayer team and all of these things. And then this other pastor, he completes the circle with he heals people and, you know, all of those types of things. And so now you have a complete picture of the perfect pastor that anything, if you look up in scripture that has anything to do with a pastor or a leader or anything, any obscure verse that you could take out of context, this team now embodies all of it. So no one can say anything against Come As You Are because this pastor team has everything. And we are a pastor team. So I think that's part of the reason why we now have to talk up Old Reliable, because now we need him to be prominent. And in my opinion, I think someone probably said something against Tom and his leadership style. And I think people had probably, because we've talked about this before, you go through these quote unquote sifting seasons. We've been in a freaking sifting season for 15 years of, you know, oh, well, we're just in a season of sifting because people get mad and they leave in a huff. And, you know, well, God just sifts out, you know, the chaff from the wheat.
Also, Melissa, you asked if that guy even wanted to be a pastor. And I don't think he did, but his wife did. Yeah. And so really, his wife knows the game. And she is the one that sells her husband should be made a pastor. She's the one in Pastor Tom's office all the time. She is involved in all ministry. She's heavily involved when the church is built. Well, maybe not built, but when it's decorated.
Yep.
Yeah, and at this time, she was heavily involved in youth. She was the female leader with the young couple and the wannabe guy.
She realizes that
and she was the one going around and doing all the ministry meetings. You're right.
Right. And if you're a woman, even if you're serving the way she's serving, you don't really have any power or clout.
Unless your husband is one step ahead of you.
Unless your husband is a great leader.
You just hit the nail on the head. Thank you for that. Because I was like, yeah, you just, yep.
Yep.
So she knew. And he's very mild-mannered. She is not. And she will be able to influence him. She may not get the title, but she'll get what she wants.
Oh, well, and when Tom would talk trash about, because Tom would be down everyone's throat. We don't gossip and we don't speak ill of people, but that man would tear people to shreds behind closed doors. The amount of trash talk that came from that guy's mouth is astronomical. And so when he would sit there and crap talk these people, he would say like, well, we all know she wears the pants in that family and he just has to do whatever. But they're teaching master life together. They are teaching how to, what's the stupid James Dobson, like strong-willed child. Basically, like your kid is mean. You should just beat the crap out of him until you break their soul and their spirit.
But then it switches and they do the like gentle child also. They do both. I forget what other study. Because it's very contradicting to people and everyone's kind of like, well, which way am I supposed to do it?
Yeah, because I was told to go take that class and because I have a kid with ADHD, well, I'm sorry. Like, I'm not going to beat my kid because there's something in him that he physically cannot control. Like, yes, do we need to work on like how to manage those things? And do I need to teach him how to maintain? Absolutely. But I don't think beating the snot out of him is that's not the way to go. So I'm not going to take that class. And there was other people who took a couple weeks of that study and were like, yeah, I'm not doing this. And so
that's got to be why
I think they had
switched over, because especially knowing, like, if she was teaching that class and she has a background and an education in ADHD, so it's like, I mean, like a huge background in education in ADHD, like it's just very, it just serves to the point. If you could be a well-educated, like extremely educated person on a subject, and then your religious views can skew you in a whole different direction. Like, that's all that is. Like, we talked about how do we go from being, I know this is wrong, to then being the person who dishes it out because you've been brainwashed by your religion. So were these people. I mean, like, they could be educated in the doctoral system on ADHD and then turn around and teach a Bible study that totally contradicts how you would parent a child with ADHD.
Yeah.
Well, I read all of Dobson's books, and I have an early childhood background, and I justified everything Dobson said.
Yeah.
I completely, and it was also easy for me as well. And these people are my age as well, and were raised by boomers, and it's the, do as I say, not as I do. Don't talk back, don't question anything. So it's very easy to teach a Bible study like this and justify what you're doing. And it's not blatant on what you're supposed to do to the kid. It doesn't come right out and say, hit your kid with a spoon.
Right. Very authoritative parenting. But Brandi, like, when you're justifying stuff, do you feel like that's the external of, like, you're doing it and you're justifying it, but the internal is a constant struggle with trying to figure out how to navigate reality? Like, this is what reality is, but this is what people that teach the Bible are telling me, and I have to somehow figure out how to reconcile that. Like, do you feel like the internal struggle is reconciliation while the external effect is justification?
Yes. Because we justified everything. And even when internally I knew it was wrong, on the outside I justified it.
Do you feel like you struggled with that, where you were like this, it doesn't make sense, but you're constantly wrestling with the information?
Well, an example is I threw a TV remote at Jason. So an act of violence, and it is not okay. And there's a lot of men that did a lot of violent things to their wife, but that was never addressed. But me throwing this remote is talked about for years in women's things. And it's done like haha funny, but it's like a fable almost of what not to do as a wife. But then it comes out, Jolene in kindergarten tells everyone in the classroom, I'm making Kool-Aid. So I have a wooden spoon.
Which is, it's so funny. Like, you're legit making Kool-Aid. Like, not like you're our joke, like serving Kool-Aid. Like, you're making Kool-Aid for the
I'm making Kool-Aid. And because we have snacks. And so the first grade room's right across. So I'm standing at the door saying, like, do you have more cups or something? And my back's turned, and Jolene stands up and says, just so you all know, she is using the spanking spoon to mix that, and she will spank all of your butts with that. She has spanked me. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be in so much trouble. I got to tell everyone now. So I do tell the parents when they come, like, this is what happened. It's a joke, whatever. And everyone's fine with it. But when it does make its way up to leadership, that is fine. Hitting Jolene is fine. Throwing something at Jason is not. It didn't even hit Jason. It hit the TV.
Yeah. But
I'm not saying that's okay, but what I'm saying,
not your child, is totally acceptable.
Yes. and encouraged.
Yeah.
So it's just funny. And there's more instances that will come up between Amanda and I's kids throughout the years that if anyone from the outside would have been watching us would have been like, you guys are insane. But it was almost like we are raising up these kids. This is how you raise them up.
Yeah. So
that had to all be justified.
So we make this guy a pastor in 2012, and by 2014, they are gone. They leave the church. There is no announcement. You know, when those random pastors would come and go, they would at least make an announcement like, hey, you know, they came out here, and, you know, especially the young youth guy was like, he was very honest. Like, you know, I did not take into account how hard it would be. I've surfed every day of my life since I was old enough to stand on a surfboard, and this is very difficult for me. I need to go back to California. I imagine it would be the same thing. Like, I've grown up and I have always lived somewhere where I can see the mountains. And if I ever had to live somewhere where I couldn't see the mountains, I think that would be really hard for me. And just because that's, you know, it gives you that like safe space, right? So, even when the weird old guy and his wife left, like there was some form of an announcement. It's not like they just dipped and we never saw them again. That's kind of how it was with this guy and his wife. Like they left the church, and then people were like, oh, well, what happened to them? I haven't seen them in a while. Are they okay? And it was like, oh, well, you know, God led them somewhere else. And there was no announcement. So it just gradually over time, it filtered through everyone that like, oh, they went somewhere else. And I remember thinking that is so loving, because people have left and made a big deal out of leaving and left yelling and left, you know, telling everyone why they left and all of that. And these people, it was clear, if you were on the inside, you knew that there was a disagreement between them and Tom. You knew something had gone down behind the scenes, that these people weren't just going to leave for no reason, right? And I remember just thinking, like, if I ever had to leave, I would want to leave like that, quietly and not, I feel like that would be the right way to leave. And even in my brain at the time, I was like, I would never leave. This is my family, because you're conditioned to believe that. Like, this is my you don't leave. Grandma doesn't all of a sudden decide grandma doesn't want to be a part of the family. That, I mean, how many times would Tom say that to you? And so, like, in my mind, I'm like, I would never leave. But if something ever happened to the point where I felt like I had to, I wouldn't want to cause a big scene. I would want to leave like them, just very quietly and very loving, which is actually like a bit of foreshadowing.
Yeah.
There.
Well, I do think it's interesting though, that like it was so quiet and not talked about. It was weird
anywhere. Yeah.
Because,
well, and for a while it was said they didn't leave and he was still a pastor. Yeah. And other people would say that to you too, like, oh no, he's still a pastor here. They're just extremely busy with this, and this. They're doing this.
It was very, very weird, and it was very intentionally weird. And I mean, I have my thoughts on that of like, I mean, you're not going to, these people definitely earned whatever asylum they got in that process. But just knowing how everybody else left and then learning backstories and stuff, you're like, it's just so, it's creepy weird. That's all I got to say about that.
Yeah. So that's in 2012, we licensed him. By 2014, he's gone. In 2014, I think during the summertime, Pastor Younggun comes and visits the church. He had just graduated seminary. He had been working at a church as like their youth leader and stuff like that. And he was trying to decide what he wanted to do, if he should stay on at this church. while he was the youth leader at that church, he would bring his youth and they would do events with us. And so our youth group and his youth group partnered on stuff. We did like a 30-hour famine a couple times they came down. Other events, he would bring people down to serve at like the big summer park event. And so there was a lot of this stuff that like he was still very much a part of Come As You Are, even though he was outside at another church. And so he comes to visit, and it was seriously just like everyone thought it was just a visit. He comes, he attends a couple of Sunday services, attending, does not get on stage, does not talk, nothing. Then all of a sudden we ordain Pastor Reliable. Now keep in mind, we licensed him in 2006.
Oh, wait a minute. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, we licensed Reliable in 2006. So for our listeners who aren't really like familiar with the process, so like you have this person who says they might want to be a pastor. So you have this almost like getting to know you phase. And then if the body feels as though this person has shown through their service and through their dedication to the family that they are truly called to be a pastor, then we license them. And so in this licensing phase, you are, the way even Pastor Younggun would describe it was, okay, now we're courting. We're courting each other. Mm-hmm. And we're trying to decide if this is a good fit for us to get married. And it is being drilled into us that when you are licensed, you are basically trying to prove yourself worthy of this call. And we license you so you can do things like you can legally perform a marriage, or you can, do funeral services, which in the state of Colorado, you don't need to be licensed for either of those things. But like Tom doesn't care about that. It's all about what Tom says you're allowed to do now. And so we have licensed Pastor Reliable, but all of a sudden we ordain him. And it was like, a lot of people were like, whoa, wait. I thought, like, what do you mean he hasn't been like an actual, like, what? Like, we thought he was a pastor and now we're ordaining him. But like Melissa, you brought up that shift that we had to have him be a more prominent, he had to have a more prominent role and things like that. And so I think there was a little bit of that of like, well, you've been telling me he's a pastor. I don't understand this licensing versus ordaining thing. And it was not discussed. The way that
I think we forgot. Honestly, I think it was forgotten.
The way that Pastor Younggun described it, he described it. Tom never described anything. And so, Reliable, we ordain him. Again, no big must, no, like, do we feel like we need to ordain? Nothing.
It's like
it was a very simple. Yes.
Right. And it's like
it was
somebody with a little more biblical knowledge comes in. It's the same thing with Destiny's Child and the church membership. Like somebody with a little more biblical knowledge comes in and says, hey, this is how things are actually done, has all the biblical proof. So then we have to tie up loose ends.
Well,
yes.
I think when Younggun came in for that visit, I think there was talk of like, would you want to come on as a pastor here? And I think he talked about, this is the steps I would have to take if I took on a pastor role at this other church. And so then I think Tom was like, oh yeah, like we should probably ordain Reliable. And so at the end of 2014, we finally ordain Reliable. And it's a very simple, like, again, it's not really like, there's not a lot of buildup. There's a couple of announcements made in the bulletin at this point of like leading up to it. And there's a little bit of hype, but it's a very simple ceremony. And then we come into 2015, and now we start off 2015 at the membership banquet. celebrating the fact that we've ordained Pastor O'Reliable, celebrating all we've done the last year. And the announcement is made is that Pastor Younggun will be coming on into the church in a leadership role to see if he would like to be a pastor here. And he is given children's ministry and youth group.
Burning Butterflies is a listener-supported podcast. Today's episode was brought to you by our amazing supporters on Patreon.
Follow the link in our show notes to learn how you can become a Patreon supporter too. Supporters get exclusive access to bonus content each month, including outtakes, cut content, and supporter-only episodes. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating on your listening platform.
Burning Butterflies is a production of Asha Media. Thank you for listening.